He said, "She's better than you." She walked out that night, heartbroken, carrying his secret, a child he didn't know existed. 3 years later, he sees them, his daughter, his ex-wife, thriving without him. Will he get a second chance, or has he lost everything forever? Hey, beautiful souls, I'm your storyteller, James. Subscribe now to uncover the full story of love, betrayal, and a mother's unstoppable power. The sky over Manhattan glowed with that rare kind of evening gold that made the city look softer than it truly was. Nia Montgomery had always loved this hour, the hush before the nightlife awakened, the glow that washed across skyscrapers like a blessing. And tonight she believed that glow belonged to her, their 5th anniversary. 5 years of building, loving, dreaming, surviving long nights and impossible expectations. She held a small gift bag in her hand, the delicate ribbon brushing against her knuckles every time she took a breath. Her other hand stayed pressed against her chest as she crossed the marble lobby of Blackwood Tower, trying to calm the quiet flutter inside her that wasn't entirely nerves. The security guards greeted her warmly. They knew her. Everyone in this building knew her. For 5 years, she was the quiet force beside Julian Blackwood, the brilliant mind he used to brag about, the woman he said grounded him, the heartbeat he'd fall asleep beside after pushing himself through another brutal quarter. She was the one who would bring him homemade soup when he'd forget to eat, the one who would straighten his tie before he walked into a meeting that could change their world. They weren't perfect, but they had survived too much to break over small cracks. Or at least she believed they had. The elevator ride felt unusually long. Her fingers tightened around the gift bag, a pair of engraved cufflinks, something timeless, something that said, "I choose you again." She had even tucked a tiny envelope beneath them, the ultrasound tucked inside, waiting to be revealed at the perfect moment. She imagined his eyes widening, his cold CEO posture melting just a little, the way it used to when he let himself be human for her. She imagined him lifting her, laughing softly against her neck, whispering, "A baby." "Our baby," the elevator chimed. She stepped onto the executive floor, a place so pristine it always felt a little unreal. The early evening light poured through the tall windows, painting long shadows across the minimalist decor. She walked toward Julian's office, heels tapping rhythmically against the polished floor, her heartbeat matching the tempo. She knocked gently, then pushed the door open. Julian stood with his back to her, staring out at the glowing skyline like a king surveying his kingdom. His reflection shimmered in the glass, broad shoulders in a tailored suit, jawline sharp, hair styled to precision. But something felt wrong. His stillness wasn't his usual controlled calm. It was colder, rigid, distant. "Julian," she said softly, a smile forming. He didn't turn. He didn't even speak her name. "The merger requires a unified front, Nia," he said, voice clipped, rehearsed. "Ilara, her family's connections. She's better for me than you." The words didn't echo. They detonated. They tore through the air with the kind of precision only Julian could deliver. Clean, calculated, merciless. For a heartbeat, Nia thought she misheard him. Her fingers tightened on the gift bag, the ribbon cutting into her palm. She opened her mouth to laugh, to dismiss it, to ask if this was some cruel joke. But Julian finally turned, and the look in his eyes told her it wasn't. He wasn't angry. He wasn't conflicted. He was resolved. Julian Blackwood, the man she learned every quiet secret of, the man whose heartbeat she memorized, looked at her as though she were a liability he had finally worked up the courage to eliminate. Her chest hollowed out. She blinked once, twice, trying to find him in his own expression. But the Julian she knew was gone, replaced by the CEO he always feared he would become. "Ilara's family will secure the merger," he continued, tone as sterile as a boardroom. "You'll be taken care of." My assistant will forward the papers. The air tightened around her like a fist. The gift bag slipped from her grasp, hitting the carpet with a muted thud. She took a step back, instinctively protective, her hand drifting to her stomach. She had imagined so many reactions from him over the years: anger, frustration, love, exhaustion. But never this. Never dismissal. Never the cruel efficiency of a man cutting ties to rise a little higher. "Julian," she whispered, voice trembling but still dignified. "We're married." His expression didn't flicker. "Not anymore," he said. "This is necessary." She inhaled sharply as the truth unfurled. He wasn't choosing another woman. He was choosing legacy, status, strategy, power. All the things she had never demanded from him because she believed she was enough. And he had just told her she wasn't. The ultrasound picture felt like a burning ember in her purse. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. She wanted him to hurt the way he had just hurt her. But the part of her that still loved him, the part carrying his child, refused to shatter in front of him. Pride held her together, piece by fragile piece. "If this is your choice," she said, voice barely steady, "then I won't stand in your way." She walked out slowly, each step deliberate. She didn't look back. Not when she reached the door. Not when she reached the hallway. Not when her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She only allowed herself a single breath in the elevator before her facade cracked. Her chest tightened so violently she gripped the railing, swallowing sobs that scraped her throat raw. The doors opened to the lobby. Cool air hit her face and her emotions swarmed like a storm threatening to break. She stepped outside into the fading gold of Manhattan's evening, feeling utterly hollow inside, as though something vital had been ripped from her and left bleeding in that pristine office. Her phone buzzed. She blinked hard, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand before pulling it out. A new message. Her doctor. Her breath caught as she read the preview on the screen. "Nia, we need to discuss the results. Call me immediately." The voicemail played only once, but the words clung to her like cold rain. 3 months. A life inside her. A heartbeat growing beneath the sorrow Julian left behind. Nia didn't cry, not at first. She simply sat on the edge of her bed, hands cupped around her phone, staring at the wall as though it held an answer. The silence of their penthouse pressed in from all sides, too big, too hollow, too cruel. Every piece of furniture felt foreign, every shadow felt like a reminder of the man who had walked away before he even knew what he was abandoning. She pressed her palm to her stomach, not to comfort herself, but to protect the tiny life that hadn't asked for any of this. A soft exhale trembled out of her. She'd imagined Julian's reaction differently. A smile that cracked through his icy exterior, his arms around her. A rare moment where he wasn't CEO Julian Blackwood, but the man who once kissed her on fire escapes and whispered love between deadlines. But those versions existed only in her memory now. Outdated screenshots of a man who had rewritten himself without her. The hours stretched into dawn. She moved like a ghost through the penthouse, choosing what to pack with the kind of precision that heartbreak teaches. Essentials only, items that carried her story, not his. Her laptop, a symbol of the self she had built before becoming Mrs. Blackwood. Her grandmother's ring, a reminder that women in her family survived storms and still grew gardens. And the ultrasound photo, soft, grainy, but full of a hope she refused to let him take. She left her wedding dress hanging in the closet, the expensive shoes, the diamond bracelet he bought out of obligation rather than affection. None of it belonged to her future. Julian's silence carved itself deeper with every passing hour. No call, no text, not even a cold corporate message to pretend he cared. It was intentional, a clean deletion, a CEO erasing an asset that no longer served the narrative he wanted to present to the world. Nia realized something sharp and painful then. She wasn't leaving because he threw her away. She was leaving because she refused to live her life as someone he could discard twice. By the time the city stirred awake, Nia was already driving. She didn't stop to admire the skyline or look back at the tower that had become her cage. The highway stretched ahead like an open vein, endless and dark. But it was hers. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, the nausea rising from pregnancy mixing with the ache of betrayal. Hours turned into miles. The city's noise faded behind her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed a place untouched by Julian's lies, by his legacy, by the coldness of that office where he traded her for a merger. Cedar Springs came into view just as the horizon shifted gold again. A small town with quiet streets, old brick buildings, and locals who walked slowly because they weren't racing anyone. She had visited twice as a child, and something about it tugged at her chest. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was survival. She found the bookstore by accident. A tiny, leaning thing with dust clouding the windows and a crooked wooden sign that read, Haven's End. The irony wasn't lost on her. She pushed the door. The bell above it rang weakly, a tired greeting, but a greeting nonetheless. Inside, the air smelled like forgotten stories and paper that had outlived its owners. Books were piled in uneven stacks, shelves sagging, and a lone lamp flickered behind the counter. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't modern. But it felt right. A place where she could breathe. A place where her child could be safe. A place where no one knew her as Julian Blackwood's mistake. She bought it using what little she had saved from selling her first app, a project she'd built long before her marriage, long before she became a shadow in someone else's empire. The previous owner, worn but kind, handed her the keys with a gentle warning. It needs work, he said. But Nia wasn't afraid of work. She was afraid of becoming someone she didn't recognize. Mrs. Pete, the neighbor with steel-gray hair and a sharper tongue, showed up 10 minutes after Nia moved in. She studied her with unimpressed curiosity, arms crossed, gaze stubborn. Then she softened, just slightly. You got fire in you, girl, she said, tapping her chest. Burn it into something good. Don't you let anyone smother it. It was the first time in days Nia felt her throat tighten with something other than pain. 2 weeks passed. She painted walls, scrubbed shelves, replaced bulbs, and sorted books. She slept lightly, pregnancy tugging her into new rhythms, loneliness filling the spaces where Julian's voice used to echo. But slowly, Cedar Springs began to feel like a life she could shape instead of endure. Until the day the black SUV drove past. She noticed it instantly, clean, polished, tinted windows too dark for any local, moving too slowly to be casual. It crawled past the bookstore like a shadow that remembered her name. Her breath caught. A chill rippled down her spine. She stepped closer to the window, heart thundering. The SUV stopped, completely, its engine humming softly as the tinted back window began to lower. The night sky over Cedar Springs had turned the color of bruises, swollen clouds pressing low, rumbling with thunder that shook the windows of Nia's small bookstore. The SUV never returned, and that thought hovered over her like a storm cloud, though the weather hadn't yet decided to match her heart. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it had been some stranger. But the fear didn't leave her. It lingered, wrapping itself around her chest, curling into her dreams and her waking hours alike. She pressed a hand to her belly, tracing the small, insistent heartbeat beneath her fingers, whispering promises she would never break. I will protect you. I will never let anyone take you from me. You are everything I have now, everything I will fight for. Weeks passed. The storm inside her body grew alongside the one outside, tightening, stretching, pushing her limits. She learned to measure the hours between contractions, pacing the floor of her apartment in the quiet darkness, listening to the rain hammering the roof. The phone remained silent. Julian remained absent. And yet, with every drop of water against the glass, every flash of lightning that illuminated the walls, she felt alive in a way that terror and anticipation mingled to create, a raw, unshakable clarity. When labor finally came, it didn't arrive politely. It didn't wait for daylight or a calm evening or a nurse at her side. It came like the thunder ripping Cedar Springs apart, like the rain demanding she pay attention. Her water broke with a violent gush, soaking the sheets and leaving her gasping on the floor, eyes wide, hands trembling. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, lightning striking the horizon as she screamed into the night, raw, primal, desperate. Naya's breath came in ragged bursts as she gripped the edges of the bed, trying to anchor herself through the contractions that tore at every muscle, every nerve, every part of her resolve. She was alone. No one came. No one checked on her. The hospital she had considered calling was 20 minutes away, and the storm made the roads impassable. And then, as though summoned by her endurance, the baby came. A fierce wail split the storm, echoing against the walls of the apartment and across the empty streets. Maya arrived into the world with fire in her lungs and the spirit of a fighter, a tiny warrior announcing her presence with a scream that demanded recognition. Naya held her immediately, cradling her child against her chest, her tears mixing with the rainstorm's rhythm. Maya's dark, curly hair glistened under the pale light of the flickering lamp, and when she opened her eyes, Nia felt a shock ripple through her entire being. Green eyes, sharp and observant even in their first blink. Julian's eyes. Those eyes she had once memorized and loved, now staring up at her with all the innocence of new life. But even as her chest ached with the memories of betrayal, Nia knew something essential. This child was not a remnant of her pain. This child was the beginning of her power. Her heart swelled with a fierce pride that would never be stolen. When the storm subsided outside, Nia finally allowed herself to breathe. Mrs. Pete, true to her word, arrived moments later, bringing warmth, presence, and calm authority. "You ain't alone," she said firmly, taking Maya into her arms with the gentle strength of someone who had seen too much and survived. "Not anymore." Nia let herself collapse into the worn couch, holding nothing but the knowledge that she had built something untouchable in that room. Her child, her future, her unbroken spirit. Over the next few weeks, she rebuilt herself piece by piece. She coded at night, her fingers flying over the keyboard while Maya slept beside her, the tiny body curled against her like a living anchor. Dawn found her feeding her child, singing softly in the new light, the quiet routine stitching together her sanity. Opening the bookstore became an act of defiance. Each customer that walked through the door was greeted not with hesitation, but with the radiant warmth of someone who had earned her smile. Shelves were straightened, windows polished, books reordered with care. Nia learned the rhythm of small business life, every sale a small victory, every recommendation a quiet celebration of survival. She became known in the town as more than just the woman who had fled the city. She became a force quietly reshaping her world. The nights were still hard. Shadows crept along the walls of her apartment, memories of Julian's absence threatening to pull her under. But Maya's laugh, a bright, unshakable sound, reminded her that she had everything she needed: strength, endurance, love untainted by betrayal. And then the day came when the past tried to reach her again. She was sitting at the desk, her hands flying across the keyboard as she updated the inventory software she had painstakingly coded to manage the bookstore efficiently. Maya was playing nearby, her laughter a comforting background melody. And then a new email appeared, its subject line cold and impersonal: Blackwood Industries Legal Department. Nia's breath caught in her throat. She froze, staring at the sender. The cursor hovered over the message, the blinking line mocking her. She knew she shouldn't open it yet. She wanted to pretend it didn't exist, that the world outside Cedar Springs had no power over her. But something deep in her chest twisted, a mixture of fear, anger, and anticipation she couldn't suppress. Hands trembling, she clicked the email. The screen loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. Her mind raced, imagining the words before they even appeared. Corporate demands, legal threats. Julian's name, undoubtedly somewhere in the signature or the text. The man who had left her alone in the city, abandoned her while she carried his child, was reaching across miles and time to remind her that he still had the means to try to control her life. The storm outside seemed to gather again. A rumble of thunder shook the windows as she read the first line. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The words were not yet fully comprehensible, but the intention was clear. This was no mistake. This was deliberate. Nia closed her eyes for a long moment. She pressed a hand to Maya's small back as the baby babbled happily, unaware of the world creeping back into their sanctuary. Nia's lips pressed together, holding back a scream she didn't want to release. She was angry. She was terrified. But she was also unbroken. Every step she had taken to reach this place, every choice she had made to survive, every night she had endured alone, was preparing her for this very moment. The legal notice demanded a response. It threatened to undo everything she had fought to build. But Nia Montgomery was no longer the woman who trembled in a penthouse in Manhattan. She had weathered storms far fiercer than this, and she knew the game that was being played. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing, a fierce determination settling into her posture. Whatever this email contained, whatever threat it brought, she would not run. She would not beg. She would not collapse. She had a daughter to protect, a business to preserve, and a life she had built from the shards of betrayal. Outside, the rain fell softly now, a quiet whisper of what had passed. Inside, Nia typed her first response, not pleading, not defensive, but deliberate. Every word measured, every phrase intentional. She was announcing silently that she had survived, that she would not be intimidated, that she was ready to fight. As she hit send, a flash of lightning lit the sky outside. The room glowed briefly in stark white, shadows of the past flickering across the walls. But Nia didn't flinch. Maya clapped her tiny hands at the sudden brightness, giggling, and Nia felt a smile tug at her lips. Not the kind that existed for Julian, but the kind reserved for victories hard-earned. Her sanctuary was no longer just a physical space. It was her strength, her child, her knowledge, and her resolve. And though the email had arrived like a storm on her doorstep, Nia knew she had become the kind of woman storms respected. She stared at the screen one last time. The sender's name lingered like a ghost she hadn't invited. The email opened a single line that made her hands go cold. "We need to discuss your compliance with Blackwood Industries immediately. Julian requests your presence." The email sat in her inbox, cold and sterile, blinking insistently at her like a reminder of everything she had tried to leave behind. The sender's name, Blackwood Industries Legal Department, was precise, familiar, calculated. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to focus. "We request confirmation of your current address for finalizing dissolution documentation. No pleasantries, no concern, no acknowledgement of her life beyond his spreadsheets and contracts. No questions about the life growing inside her months ago. No curiosity about the child she now held and protected fiercely. Just words, stark and sharp, demanding attention as though human warmth was irrelevant." Nia pressed her lips together, reading the email again. She felt her pulse in her throat, sharp and steady, a reminder that Julian Blackwood had not changed. The man who had abandoned her while she carried his child still treated life as a ledger, a balance sheet of advantages and losses. She didn't reply immediately. She stared at the screen, thinking about the choices that had brought her here, the nights of loneliness, the hours coding software while Maya slept beside her, the small victories of breathing life into her bookstore, Haven's End. This was no longer the woman who trembled in his penthouse, her dreams tethered to someone else's ambitions. Finally, she typed, slowly, deliberately, "There is no dissolution to finalize. I signed nothing." She read it once, twice. The sentence was her shield, her declaration, her refusal to allow him control over her anymore. And then she blocked the address. She watched the cursor blink at her, the finality of it echoing in her chest. There was a brief moment of silence, as if the world paused to acknowledge her decision. She felt a lightness, like the first exhale after holding a breath for too long. Julian could not reach her. Julian could not erase her. He could not touch her daughter. Days passed, the bookstore flourished. Nia's life took on a rhythm that felt like recovery, like growth, like a life she owned entirely. She arranged warm lighting that made the shelves glow. She placed hand-picked books in neat stacks, creating corners where children could read safely while their parents wandered. One corner, specially designed for tiny patrons, included bright cushions and her own coding touches. An AI-powered system that tracked inventory, suggested titles, and even reminded her to schedule reading sessions for local kids. Maya grew alongside the store. Her laughter bounced off the walls, her curiosity endless. Every day brought new questions, new discoveries, new giggles that reminded Naya of her purpose and the life she had fought to protect. In Cedar Springs, mother and daughter became inseparable, a small nucleus of strength and love. Meanwhile, the world outside continued its usual dance. Julian's social media accounts remained a stark contrast to her quiet victories. He attended glamorous events, his arm around Alara, a picture of perfection and old money polish. He posed with powerful men and women in skyscraper ballrooms, his smile frozen, controlled but somehow empty. Every image, every caption, hinted at a life built on appearances rather than substance. Something in his eyes looked fractured, and Nia, from her quiet corner of the world, recognized it immediately. She did not feel satisfaction at the sight. She only felt acknowledgement. He was still haunted, still incomplete, still missing something he had thrown away. The nights at the bookstore carried their own magic. Nia would sit after closing, her laptop perched on the desk as she fine-tuned the community engagement software she had designed. Maya would curl up in a small blanket nest nearby, murmuring sleepy questions about the books on the shelves or the stars outside the window. Nia would answer with gentle patience, her mind half on her daughter, half on the codes and scripts that formed her independence. Her agency, her legacy. It was in one of these quiet evenings, the rain tapping softly against the windows, that Nia discovered something she had not expected. She was browsing an industry forum, a niche space for tech entrepreneurs and innovators, when a thread caught her attention. The discussion was about AI-powered inventory systems for small businesses, a subject she knew intimately, having built her own. Her name appeared on the trending page, bold, unmistakable, glowing in the digital spotlight like a beacon she had never sought but could not ignore. It wasn't just her name. The post carried her image, her system, her bookstore, all laid out in admiration and critique at the same time. And at the bottom, a username she knew instantly, a signature of someone who had once haunted her every thought, controlled her every breath. Julian Blackwood, CEO. Nia froze. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. Her pulse throbbed painfully against her ribs. The warmth of the bookstore, the soft laughter of Maya, the comforting hum of her AI system, all of it suddenly felt fragile under the weight of that familiar digital presence. She couldn't breathe at first. The room seemed smaller, the walls pressing in, as though Julian's shadow had somehow crossed the miles and the years, embedding itself back into her life through the smallest, most precise intrusion. Her mind raced with questions. Was it curiosity? Was it corporate investigation? Or was it something else? A need he could not articulate? A recognition of what he had lost? Naya did not trust herself to guess. She knew only that the sight of his name filled her with every emotion she had tried to suppress. Anger, fear, unresolved grief, and a flicker of the old ache she had carried in her chest for years. She closed her laptop slowly, breathing deeply, feeling the tension knotting her shoulders. Maya tugged at her sleeve, eyes wide, sensing her mother's unease. Nia forced a smile, smoothing the baby's curls back from her forehead. "Nothing to worry about, baby," she whispered softly. "Just some old stories trying to reach us." But inside she knew the stories weren't old. They were alive. They were waiting. They were coming. And for the first time in years, Nia realized she had no idea what he wanted or what he would do next. She returned to her coding late into the night, her fingers tapping with deliberate precision, trying to drown out the pulse of uncertainty that the forum thread had ignited. Every line of code was a shield, every algorithm a small fortress she built against the past, intruding on her present. But still, the name lingered like smoke in her mind, curling around her thoughts, refusing to dissipate. Hours passed. Maya slept at last, wrapped in a small blanket, unaware of the storm growing in her mother's mind. Nia leaned back in her chair, eyes staring at the ceiling. The bookstore was quiet now, the shelves orderly, the windows gleaming with reflections of lamplight. Yet she felt it, the first tremor of a storm she could not control. The kind of storm that had nothing to do with rain and everything to do with the man who once believed he owned her life. Her heart raced, but her resolve held. She was no longer the woman who had waited for him to decide her worth. She was Nia Montgomery. She had a child. She had a business. She had a future she had built herself. And yet the name on the forum lingered, a reminder that the past had not entirely released its grip. She stared at the glowing screen, mind sharp, calculating, protective. Whoever Julian Blackwood thought he was about to learn something new. Nia Montgomery was not someone to be underestimated. Outside, the wind rustled the newly painted sign of Haven's End. The night seemed to hold its breath, as though anticipating what was coming next. Nia's eyes widened as she scrolled further. The post contained a line that made her blood run cold. "She built this without me, but I'm coming for what's mine." Julian Blackwood had not slept in days. Manhattan's skyline blurred past his penthouse windows like a smear of gold and gray. But he hardly noticed. His laptop sat open on the mahogany desk, the screen bathing his face in a harsh, clinical light. He had logged onto a tech forum he rarely visited, one that usually offered only data, analytics, and the occasional investor tip. But today it offered him something else. Her name, Nia Montgomery. It popped up in the trending topics, an article about her bookstore and AI software that had quietly gone viral in tech circles. Her photograph accompanied the post, soft sunlight streaming through her shop windows, her brown skin glowing, her eyes intelligent and warm, the hint of a smile playing on her lips. She looked unstoppable. She looked alive. She looked happier than she ever had with him. Julian's chest constricted the moment he noticed something else. A child sat beside her in the photograph, curly hair catching the light, a small hand reaching for a book, and the eyes, green, piercing, undeniably his. The same green eyes that had once held wonder when she had looked at him, that same spark he thought he had erased from his life. "My God, Nia, what have I done?" he whispered, his voice trembling as the weight of realization descended. The blood drained from his face. His hands gripped the edge of the desk as the images, the text, the proof of everything he had abandoned, hit him all at once. He read frantically, almost violently, scanning through every detail of her life post-departure. The bookstore she had rescued from bankruptcy, the corner she had built for children, the AI system she had designed entirely from scratch, the community programs she had launched, the smile of Maya in her arms. Julian's world contracted. Every achievement, every small victory, every ounce of strength she had displayed without him mocked him. He had walked away thinking she was replaceable, thinking she would crumble, thinking she would wait in vain. But she had not only survived, she had flourished. She had built a life, a legacy, a world that had no place for him in it. He could feel the guilt clawing at his chest, sharp and unrelenting. Every memory of their time together, the laughter, the whispered promises, the nights spent in soft exhaustion, became a jagged knife in his gut. And then Ilara's words came back to him, cruel and piercing. "You never loved me. You loved the woman you threw away." Julian's fingers shook. He pushed back from the desk, the chair scraping against the marble floor. He did not think. He did not plan. He simply grabbed his keys, his heart racing like a panicked drumbeat, and drove without destination, guided only by one thought. He needed to see her. Hours later, the roads outside Manhattan blurred into green fields and small towns, and the city's steel and glass gave way to rolling hills and quiet streets. Julian Blackwood, a man used to commanding boardrooms, used to bending people and deals to his will, felt a strange helplessness creeping into him with every mile. This was a world he had never conquered, a life he had never imagined he would find. Cedar Springs appeared on the horizon as the sky began to bleed, the first light of dawn. Mist curled along the streets, softening the edges of the town. The bakery's windows reflected pink light. The clock tower chimed somewhere in the distance. The tranquility of the morning contrasted sharply with the storm raging inside Julian. His car rolled slowly past familiar streets that were now alien in their calmness. Each corner, each brick building reminded him of the life he had forsaken. And then he saw it, the crooked wooden sign of Haven's End, swaying gently in the morning breeze. He slowed, every nerve taut, every heartbeat echoing in his chest. This was it. She was here, alive, whole, untouched by the corporate greed and betrayal that had defined him for so long. And he was about to confront the consequences of his choices. Meanwhile, inside the bookstore, Nia was unpacking a fresh shipment of books. The smell of paper, ink, and polished wood filled the air, a comforting cocoon of her own making. Maya sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping through picture books with wonder in her green eyes. Mrs. Pete hummed softly while arranging vegetables she had just purchased at the morning market, her hands steady, her presence grounding. The door chimed gently as a breeze slipped in through the cracked window. Nia looked up but saw nothing. Maya's laughter broke the momentary silence as she pointed to a butterfly on the window pane. Nia turned back to the counter, unaware that her life was about to change in the next few minutes. The sound of a heavy engine approached outside. At first, she thought it was a delivery truck. Then a black car pulled into the small lot in front of the bookstore. The vehicle was sleek, polished, and entirely out of place in Cedar Springs. The windows were tinted, but the aura of menace that seemed to radiate from it made Mrs. Pete's shoulders tense. Before Nia could register who it might be, the car door opened. The figure that stepped out was unmistakable, familiar, and the kind of presence that made the world pause. Mrs. Pete's grocery bags slipped from her hands, scattering tomatoes and leafy greens across the pavement. She let out a startled gasp, her eyes widening as she looked up at the man. The air thickened with the sudden weight of history, betrayal, and unresolved pain. Maya, oblivious, babbled happily at the dropped vegetables, unaware of the danger or the storm that had just arrived. The man stood there, tall, imposing, the sunlight glinting off the cuff of his tailored suit. There was a tension in his posture, a hesitation that betrayed a rare vulnerability. He was not just a stranger in Cedar Springs, he was a ghost from the past. The ghost that had once held Nia's heart and shattered it. Julian Blackwood had come. Nia, hearing the distant commotion outside, instinctively rose from the counter. Her heart skipped a beat, not in fear for herself, but in a protective, motherly rhythm for Maya. She moved toward the door, her mind racing with questions, her body poised between caution and confrontation. Every step toward the entrance was deliberate, every breath measured. She could not let panic rule her actions, could not let history repeat itself. When she reached the doorway, her eyes locked on the figure standing among the fallen vegetables. Time seemed to stretch. The early dawn cast long shadows across the pavement, exaggerating the lines of a face she once knew intimately. Julian's eyes met hers, green eyes mirrored by her daughter's, the same eyes that had haunted him for years. His expression was unreadable for a moment, caught between guilt, longing, and something darker, something unspeakable. Recognition of the life he had lost and the power she now wielded. Nia felt every muscle in her body tense, every instinct sharpen. She would not be the woman who ran, who cowered, who begged. She was a mother, a builder of worlds, a survivor. She had her daughter. She had her business. She had herself. And yet she could not deny the tremor in her chest, the sudden, frightening awareness that this man, this ghost, could no longer be ignored. The wind picked up, scattering a few loose pages from the bookstore's outdoor display. Maya squealed, laughing, as Nia swept her into her arms. Mrs. Pete, hands still trembling from the spilled groceries, whispered under her breath, "God help us! He's back!" Julian took a hesitant step forward. Every polished, controlled movement of the man who dominated skyscrapers was now strained with uncertainty. His eyes never left Nia's. There was no charm, no corporate mask, only the raw, unfiltered awareness of the storm he had triggered. Nia held Maya tighter. She glanced briefly at Mrs. Pete, whose stern gaze softened into silent support. This confrontation was no longer just hers. It was for her daughter, for the life she had carved out, for every small victory she had fought to protect. The car behind him waited silently, the engine humming like a heartbeat. But Julian Blackwood was no longer just a man in a vehicle. He was a reckoning, a living echo of the past, and for the first time in years, Nia understood that some ghosts do not disappear. They wait for the right moment to challenge you. Maya kicked her tiny legs in delight, sensing only excitement while Nia braced herself, every fiber of her being alert, every thought focused on the man who had once shattered her life. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowed by uncertainty and awe. There were no words prepared for the woman who now stood taller, stronger, and far more formidable than the one he had left behind. The street around them seemed suspended, the early light of dawn illuminating every detail, the crooked bookstore sign, the scattered vegetables, the small figure of Maya in her mother's arms, and the man who had once defined her past standing frozen in recognition. And in that silence, Nia Montgomery realized the past had found her, and it was demanding an answer. Julian's voice finally broke the tension, low and trembling. "Nia, I need to know. Is she mine?" Julian stepped through the bookstore doorway as if walking into a dream he had no right to inhabit. The scent of polished wood and fresh paper filled the air, but it no longer belonged to him. Every detail, the colorful shelves, the warm lighting, the gentle hum of the AI system managing the children's reading corner, was a testament to a life he had forsaken. Maya sat cross-legged on the rug with 3 other children, her laughter bright and clear as Nia's voice wove through the story. Julian's breath caught. The sound of her joy, of her innocence, was like a hammer striking his chest. This little girl, so alive and radiant, carried his eyes, the same green he had once cherished in Nia's gaze, but she had none of the entitlement he had assumed came with legacy. She was vibrant, untainted, perfect in ways he had never understood until this moment. He looked at Nia. She stood behind the counter, book in hand, poised, calm, unshakable. Her brown skin glowed in the morning light streaming through the front windows. Her posture was elegant, composed, her eyes a storm contained beneath a measured surface. This was not the woman who had clutched at his shirt, trembling, begging for a sliver of love. This was a queen in her own right, a fortress no apology could penetrate. Their eyes met. There was no shock, no tremor of fear, no trace of the past's raw hurt showing in her face, only quiet, deadly calm. Julian's chest tightened as he realized the magnitude of what he had lost, the power he had discarded. "Children," she said softly, the words deliberate, controlled, every syllable commanding attention without raising her voice. "Story time is over." Maya's little legs pumped as she bolted toward the back room with Mrs. Pete, clutching the storybook to her chest. Julian froze, watching his daughter's small frame disappear around the corner. Every step she took away from him was a silent confirmation of the distance he had created, the chasm that could never be bridged with charm or wealth alone. Julian's voice broke, raw, uneven. "You never told me." Nia's stance did not waver. Her eyes did not soften. Her spine straightened, and she allowed herself a brief exhale of controlled power. "You made it clear your family was a business transaction," she said, her tone as cutting as steel. "I was protecting my asset." He stepped closer, his voice low and trembling, loaded with regret. I didn't know. I didn't understand. Ignore the words you didn't speak," Nia interrupted, taking a measured step back. "They don't matter. You don't get to touch me anymore." The words struck like lightning. Julian's hand reached for her, hesitant, pleading, desperate. He wanted to bridge the years of absence, the mistakes, the betrayals. But he had no right. She had built walls out of her pain, out of her daughter, out of the life he had abandoned. He could not penetrate them. Her gaze held him in place, firm, immovable. Every ounce of fury, heartbreak, and resolve radiated from her like heat from an open flame. He had expected tears, weakness, the remnants of the woman who had once loved him blindly. Instead, he saw strength, a calm that spoke louder than any scream could. Julian's shoulders sagged, the weight of his own failures pressing down. He could see Maya in the back room, safe, laughing, alive, a life he had no claim to, a life he had forsaken. Guilt coiled in his stomach like a living thing, twisting tighter with every heartbeat. He started again, voice breaking, reaching for words he could not find. "Nia, I'm sorry, You're late," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, but with the resonance of authority. "You're too late to apologize. You're too late to demand. You're too late to touch my life or my daughter's. Step back." Julian froze, pain etched across his face, mingling with longing, shame, and disbelief. He had imagined this moment countless times, imagined her running into his arms, imagined her begging for him, but reality struck with a brutal, unforgiving clarity. Nia had built a life without him. She did not need him. She did not want him. He stepped back, slowly, the physical motion matching the emotional distance she had built years ago. Every step echoed in the quiet bookstore, emphasizing the void between past and present. The morning light caught something on his wrist, a phone buzzing. Julian looked down. His lawyer. The screen flashed with urgency. He hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Something about the call unsettled him in a way that even he could not articulate. Nia, observing from the counter, saw the subtle change in him. She noticed the tension, the shadow in his eyes, the quick inhale as he picked up the phone. There was something there, a danger, a threat, something beyond personal regret. She did not flinch. Her hand hovered near the edge of the counter. Every instinct screamed that this was not just about words anymore. This was about power. This was about survival. This was about protecting Maya and everything she had fought to build. Julian spoke into the phone, voice low, almost frantic. His words were muffled, but the gravity was unmistakable. He glanced toward Nia, the corner of his mouth twitching as though the conversation was slipping beyond his control. Nia's stomach twisted, an instinctual reaction to the faintest scent of threat, the slightest glimpse of danger. The calm that had held her so far wavered slightly, sharpened by her intuition. She had seen Julian act under pressure before. She knew the man he could become, the ruthless, calculating force that had once discarded her without hesitation. The tension in the room thickened. The hum of the AI system managing the bookstore faded into the background. The scattered pages of books on the counter fluttered slightly, as if sensing the storm building inside the store. Julian's voice grew more urgent. His posture stiffened. His hand gripped the phone tighter. Whatever the lawyer said had changed something. Something dangerous. Nia's eyes narrowed. She did not move toward him. She did not reach for Maya. She did not even breathe too quickly. She simply watched, poised like a predator assessing the prey before her. Every ounce of her being focused on controlling what was about to happen. Julian ended the call abruptly. The phone slipped from his hand, landing on the floor with a soft thud. He stared at it for a long moment, his chest heaving, green eyes flicking back to Nia. There was no warmth, no familiarity, only the sharp awareness that the world she had built could be threatened, but he had no right to intervene. Nia's mind raced. She had trained herself for this moment, had built defenses, had planned for confrontation. But she had not anticipated danger arriving hand in hand with Julian's presence. Her instincts screamed at her to act, to protect, to command. She stepped forward slightly, keeping her posture controlled, regal, unyielding. "You need to leave," she said, voice low but carrying authority that made Julian falter. "Whatever this is, whatever he just told you, it does not involve me. It does not involve Maya. You have no right here." Julian's gaze wavered between shock, guilt, and fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to speak, to explain, to beg, but the words lodged in his throat. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the small sign of the bookstore. Maya's laughter echoed faintly from the back room, a reminder of innocence untouched by adult treachery. Nia's eyes never left Julian's. She was ready. Every lesson she had learned, every battle she had fought, every tear shed in the darkness had led to this moment. She would not be intimidated. She would not be controlled. She would not bend. The air vibrated with unspoken tension. One wrong word, one misstep, and the fragile balance could shatter. Julian's eyes flicked down at his phone again, his jaw tightening. He whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "They've moved faster than I expected." And Nia felt it, an invisible shadow of threat that could unravel everything she had built. Julian Blackwood stepped out of the bookstore, the early morning sun reflecting off the wet pavement. His hands shook, betraying the calm facade he had cultivated for decades. Every step he took felt heavy, weighted with the knowledge of what he had lost and the power he had once wielded with ease. But now, standing in Cedar Springs, far from the skyscrapers and boardrooms of Manhattan, he felt vulnerable, small. The memory of Nia's calm, regal gaze lingered in his mind. The sight of Maya, her little hands gripping a storybook, her green eyes shimmering with innocence and curiosity, haunted him. He had imagined reclaiming her, controlling her, molding her into a part of his legacy. And yet, in reality, she belonged wholly to Nia, untouchable, cherished, and thriving. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from his legal team. He answered it immediately, desperate for direction, guidance, a roadmap through the storm of his own making. "We can handle this, Julian," the voice said, confident and clinical. "She may have hidden your child, but the law is clear. You have rights. We can enforce DNA testing, secure custody, and ensure immediate compliance. You just have to act." Julian's chest tightened. The words ignited something deep and dangerous, a belief that his world, his control, could be restored. Desperation collided with ego, and he nodded mutely, letting the corporate instinct override the man who once had loved. By the next morning, a thick envelope sat at Nia's door. She picked it up, her hands steady, though her heart thumped like a drum in her chest. The legal papers were precise, cold, and unforgiving. DNA testing, custody demands, immediate compliance. They were not letters of reconciliation or requests for dialogue. They were weapons, corporate strikes masquerading as parental concern. The handwriting of Julian's team was meticulous, the language sharp and clinical, leaving no room for humanity, for compassion, for recognition of the life Nia had built alone. Nia sank onto the wooden porch steps, the envelope trembling slightly in her lap. The weight of it was more than paper and ink. It was a declaration that, even after all she had endured, he still sought dominance, still treated her and her child as a challenge to be subdued. She shook her head, not in fear, but in disbelief. Julian Blackwood had not changed. He was still the man who placed business above love, strategy above family, ego above empathy. The man she had once given herself to, who had promised a lifetime, who had left her with a child in her womb and a shattered heart. He was still the same. Nia let out a slow breath and pulled her laptop onto her lap. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, the quiet hum of the computer filling the air. She didn't type from anger or revenge. She typed from clarity, from truth, from the unshakable certainty that her life, her daughter, and her integrity were hers to defend. She began drafting a public statement, directed not at Julian personally, but at the world. She reached the tech journalists who had once celebrated her innovative work, the small community who had supported her bookstore, the forums that had marveled at her AI system. She wrote not as a victim, but as a survivor. She wrote not for sympathy, but for recognition of what it meant to rise from betrayal, to build from ashes, to endure without compromise. The statement was crisp, controlled, and powerful. It told the story of Julian's calculated abandonment, of her pregnancy, of the quiet empire she had built in Cedar Springs. It highlighted the contrast between corporate greed and human integrity, between the man who sought power and the woman who had reclaimed her life without him. Within hours, the internet ignited. Articles were shared. Social media posts flooded timelines. Commentators praised her resilience, her intelligence, her ability to turn betrayal into empowerment. The story went viral. Nia's face appeared across screens, radiant and strong, eyes sharp with the wisdom of someone who had survived unthinkable loss. Meanwhile, Julian watched from Manhattan, stunned. His phone vibrated endlessly with notifications, board emails, investor calls, Ilara's statements, news updates. He realized too late that his carefully orchestrated corporate attack had backfired. His board wavered, questioning his judgment, questioning his integrity. Investors withdrew, fearing a leadership that had allowed personal failure to infect professional decisions. Ilara's public denouncement struck him hardest. The woman he had believed could replace Nia, the one he had chosen as a strategic partner, had called out his duplicity, his obsession with ego over family. He had not only lost Nia, he had lost credibility, reputation, and control. And yet, the cruelest truth sank in slowly, painfully. He had not filed for custody of Maya out of love. He had filed for himself, for his pride, for the illusion of authority. Every motion, every lawyer's memo, every demand was a reflection of his wounded ego, not parental concern. The realization tore at him. Julian sat in his office, hands gripping the edge of his desk, staring blankly at the skyline. His empire was vast but hollow. His power was intact but meaningless. His wealth was immense, but it could not buy back the life he had lost. The daughter he had ignored, the wife he had discarded, the future he had destroyed. All of it existed without him, thriving despite him. Back in Cedar Springs, Nia closed her laptop, a sense of calm settling over her. The storm Julian had tried to bring into her life had failed. She had not only survived, she had revealed the truth to the world. She had reclaimed her power. She had protected Maya. She had turned the weapons of her former life into a shield, a platform, a declaration of autonomy. The community responded, showing up at her bookstore, sharing her story, reinforcing the sanctuary she had built. Maya's laughter filled the space again, echoing off the walls lined with books and dreams. Nia held her daughter close, knowing that no legal maneuver, no corporate strategy, no man could undo what she had forged from grief and courage. And yet, as she prepared for the inevitable court proceedings, she knew that the next challenge would arrive, not as a story online, not as a statement to the press, but in person, in the sterile, intimidating environment of a courthouse. She felt Maya's tiny hand slip into hers. The little girl pressed a crayon-drawn paper into Nia's bag before stepping away. Nia glanced down, and her heart tightened. The drawing depicted three figures, one small, one taller, one imposing, drawn with careful strokes of color. Above them, in childish scrawl, a simple caption read, "Mommy, me, and the sad man." Nia's breath caught. She understood instantly that the innocence of Maya's perspective carried a weight Julian could not challenge, a truth that could not be hidden, a revelation that would dismantle his last defenses. The paper, small and unassuming, was poised to rewrite the next chapter of confrontation, and Nia knew with absolute certainty that when Julian saw it, everything he had assumed about power, control, and family would be shattered. On the courthouse morning, Nia's bag shifted, and Julian caught a glimpse of Maya's drawing. Three stick figures and a truth too devastating for him to deny. His hands trembled as he whispered, "No, this can't be real." The courtroom was sterile, its walls echoing with the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Yet it carried a weight Julian had never experienced in the glass and steel towers of Manhattan. Here, the rules were human, not corporate. Here, power was not measured by deals or profits, but by the fragile, raw truths that could not be negotiated away. Julian sat, fingers drumming nervously against the arm of his chair, his tailored suit feeling suddenly like armor against a world he no longer commanded. Every movement in the room, the shuffle of papers, the quiet coughs, the soft footsteps of lawyers, reminded him of what he had lost, of the life he had abandoned, of the daughter he had never known. Nia sat across from him, calm, composed, radiant even under the harsh fluorescent light. Her hands rested lightly on the table, holding her folder, the weight of her presence both a challenge and a revelation. Julian's eyes kept flicking to her, searching for a trace of vulnerability he could exploit, a crack in her composure he might use to reclaim a fragment of his ego. Maya's little hands twitched nervously beside her mother, clutching a small crayon box she had snuck into the courtroom. She had been quiet, observing, as if sensing that today her voice would be heard not in words but in art, in honesty, in a truth that could not be denied. Then it happened. A faint slip, a paper falling from Nia's folder. Julian's heart stopped. He watched it land face up on the polished table between them, and in that instant, the air thickened. He could see it clearly. The jagged, innocent strokes of a child's hand, Three stick figures, one with brown skin, one small, and one larger with piercing green eyes. Tears drawn with a crayon streaked down the face of the largest figure. Above it, in uneven, childish letters, were words that made Julian's chest seize. Mommy, me, and the sad man. The world tilted. His suit felt like a trap. The polished shoes on his feet seemed absurdly small beneath the enormity of what he had ignored. The courtroom itself, the judge, the lawyers, the audience, faded from his perception. All that existed was the drawing. Julian pressed his hands to his face. The image, the simplicity of it, the innocence, the truth, broke through decades of control, ego, and denial. For the first time, he wept openly, not the calculated, silent tears he occasionally allowed himself in solitude, not the poised, veiled discomfort he had mastered in boardrooms. These were jagged, unrefined sobs, guttural sounds that shook his chest, shook the air, shook the foundation of every decision he had ever made. Nia watched him, not with anger, not with vengeance, not with the temptation to punish the man who had abandoned her. She watched with the quiet dignity of a woman who had already mourned the man she once loved, who had faced her pain alone, and who had emerged stronger, unbroken. Her eyes were pools of calm, reflecting not only sorrow but the certainty of justice, the triumph of truth, the inviolable bond with her daughter. Maya shifted slightly, sensing the tension, feeling the tremor in the air. She had drawn this picture not as a weapon, not as a tool, but as a language she understood, as a way to communicate what words could not express. The tears on the green-eyed figure were not anger. They were recognition. They were the first honest acknowledgement of the pain Julian had caused. Julian's body shook, his knees weakened. The courtroom remained silent, hanging on the moment like the quiet before a storm. The judge's pen paused mid-note, the bailiff's breath caught, and the room seemed to hold its collective heartbeat for him. He remembered Nia's pregnancy, the night she had left him, the storm, the birth he had missed, the quiet days he had ignored. Every memory, every cruel decision, every ambition that had blinded him converged into one excruciating truth. He had not only abandoned a wife, he had abandoned a life, a child, a legacy that mattered far more than any corporate merger or public image. Nia's voice cut softly through the silence, measured, unwavering. She is my priority, always has been. You are not, and that will not change. Julian lifted his head, green eyes wet, raw with shame and shock. He looked at Maya, at the drawing, at the unspoken truth that a child's innocence could expose more than any legal brief, more than any argument, more than any wealth or power. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in around him, and the magnitude of his failures became unbearable. Every step he had taken, every decision he had made, every fleeting moment of ambition had led to this confrontation with reality. He realized, finally, that nothing he could offer, money, influence, apologies, would undo the damage. The drawing did not just accuse, it revealed. It revealed the emptiness of his choices, the arrogance of his ego, and the magnitude of what he had failed to protect. Nia's hands rested lightly on the table, her posture unyielding. She did not need to argue. She did not need to beg for justice. The truth had spoken. It had been drawn in crayon, framed in innocence, and it had pierced the armor Julian had spent a lifetime constructing. Maya tugged gently at Nia's sleeve, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy." I made him see. Julian's gaze flicked between mother and child, between innocence and truth. His throat tightened. The courtroom seemed to tilt, the air heavy with expectation. Every legal argument, every motion, every lawyer's whisper was rendered meaningless in the presence of this undeniable truth. He rose suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor, eyes wide and desperate. He turned toward the judge, hands trembling. The courtroom holding its breath. His voice, when it came, was raw, broken, and devoid of the confident authority that had defined him for so long. The judge leaned forward, pen poised. The gallery of spectators leaned forward, sensing the magnitude of what was unfolding. Lawyers whispered anxiously to one another. Julian swallowed hard, words catching in his throat. He opened his mouth. The first syllables were barely audible, but the weight of them struck the room like a hammer. Every eye turned to him. Every ear tuned in. I withdraw my petition, he said finally, voice hollow, trembling. I surrender all parental rights. The words were simple, yet devastating. The courtroom exhaled collectively. The impact of his surrender was felt far beyond the room, reverberating in every corner of Julian's carefully controlled world. Nia's lips curved in a quiet, unshakable expression of victory, tempered by the calm dignity she had cultivated over years of struggle. Maya smiled up at her mother, triumphant in her innocence, knowing that truth had prevailed. Julian lowered his head, tears streaking down his face. He had lost, not to Nia, not to the law, not to society, but to the undeniable power of love, integrity, and the simple honesty of a child's heart. The courtroom remained silent for a long moment, everyone digesting the reality that a simple drawing had shattered the defenses of a man who had thought he controlled everything. Nia reached for Maya's hand, the two of them standing together, unshakable, victorious in a way that no court ruling could have achieved. They had survived betrayal, manipulation, and ambition. They had survived Julian. Julian whispered to himself, voice raw with shock and a hint of something else. Regret, fear, maybe even awe. Can I ever be in their life? And Nia's eyes, steady and unyielding, met his, holding the answer he both feared and needed to hear. Julian walked out of the courtroom into the sterile hallway, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by silence. His chest felt hollow, every breath weighted with the gravity of the choice he had made. The echo of the words he had spoken, I withdraw my petition, I surrender all parental rights, reverberated in his mind, a truth he could neither take back nor escape. His lawyers trailed behind, whispers urgent, frantic, full of disbelief. They argued, they urged, they tried to rationalize strategies, outcomes, and next moves, but Julian's mind had already departed from their world of tactics. He didn't care. Strategy, power, litigation, all of it felt meaningless now. His ego, meticulously curated over decades, had been stripped bare in the presence of a child's honesty and a mother's unwavering integrity. He paused near the courthouse doors, staring at the gray light outside, the city buzzing with indifferent life, and felt the weight of every decision that had led him here. How had he spent years building empires while failing the one life he was meant to protect? How had ambition and pride blinded him to the smallest, most essential truths? Nia, he whispered, his voice cracking, raw and fragile. The word hung in the air like a plea, like a confession, like an apology he had carried silently for far too long. She met his gaze calmly. Her eyes were steady, the calm of someone who had already survived betrayal, who had already transformed pain into strength. He saw no malice, no triumph, only clarity, and the subtle, unyielding message that the past could not be rewritten, but the future could be negotiated. For the first time, Julian thought, she sees me as I really am, not the CEO, not the man with the perfect suit, not the one who controls everything. She sees me stripped of ego, stripped of pretense, stripped of everything but the truth. He swallowed hard. His chest ached with the admission that he had been weak, that he had failed, and that there was no way to undo the years he had lost. Yet, in that moment, there was also the tiniest spark of hope, fragile and flickering. A chance, if he was willing to do the work, to rebuild not as a conqueror, but as a man accountable for his actions. The The judge had dismissed the case. Papers were signed, stamped, and final. The sound of the gavel had felt distant to Julian, almost unreal, like a punctuation mark he had not earned, a closure he was not ready to face. He felt hollowed out, stripped of illusions, his carefully constructed identity unraveling thread by thread. He walked down the courthouse steps, sunlight bouncing off the polished stone, and realized how much of his life had been built on illusions. Money, influence, reputation, all meaningless compared to the love and trust he had destroyed. And now, for the first time, he understood what mattered. "Nia," he said again, softer, almost reverently. "Can I ever be in her life?" His voice trembled. There was no bravado, no confidence, only raw, unguarded vulnerability. Nia held his gaze steadily. She did not smile. She did not nod. She did not relent. She weighed her words carefully, understanding the stakes not only for herself, but for Maya. "Maybe," she said, her tone measured, firm, unyielding. "One day, on my terms, under supervision, and only if you get help, real help." Julian nodded slowly, defeated but grateful. The relief was complicated, bittersweet, heavy with the knowledge that forgiveness was not his to claim, that trust had to be rebuilt, step by painstaking step. In the days that followed, Julian returned to Manhattan, a changed man, or at least a man confronting the truth he had avoided for too long. The offices he once dominated felt smaller, hollow. The boardroom strategies, the negotiations, the mergers, they all seemed absurd now. What was the point of conquering the world when he had abandoned the one life that mattered most? Meanwhile, Nia returned to Cedar Springs and the quiet rhythm of her life. Maya's laughter filled the bookstore again, echoing off the walls lined with books, stories, and lessons. Mrs. Pete noticed the shift in Nia, the subtle glow of relief and power that comes from having faced your demons and emerged unbroken. Nia's days were busy, filled with coding, bookstore management, and nurturing Maya. But now there was a different weight in her chest. A sense of justice had been restored, yes, but more importantly, the future felt open, filled with possibilities she could finally embrace without fear of Julian's interference. She thought of the courtroom frequently, of Julian's eyes, his tears, his broken ego, and she allowed herself a small, private acknowledgement of satisfaction, not cruelty, not vindication, but the recognition that she had survived and he had finally understood the magnitude of his failures. Nia's story began to circulate in quiet, influential circles. The way she had turned betrayal into empowerment, how she had raised a child alone while building a thriving business, caught the attention of those looking to highlight resilience, courage, and female leadership. Articles, social media posts, and community newsletters began to reference her journey, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a template of strength. Weeks passed, the tension between past and future, between what was lost and what had been rebuilt, began to settle into a quiet rhythm. Nia felt the weight of her responsibilities, yes, but also the extraordinary freedom of being unbound from someone else's agenda. Then came the email, a subject line that seemed almost surreal. "Documentary feature request, your story of resilience." Nia read it twice, then a third time. Global producers, teams of filmmakers, and journalists reached out, requesting interviews, footage, access to her bookstore, her life, her journey from heartbreak to empowerment. They wanted to capture her story, not as a victim, but as a queen who had risen from betrayal. Her pulse quickened. This was more than recognition. This was validation. This was the world finally acknowledging that her struggle, her courage, her unyielding integrity had created something extraordinary. Maya peeked around Nia, curious. "Mommy, are they coming here?" Nia smiled, a calm, unshakable smile. "Yes, baby." but only because we've earned it. Only because we've proven that even the hardest storms can't stop us." She paused, glancing at the legal documents tucked away, at the courtroom memories, at the small, powerful drawing that had broken Julian. The journey had been long, painful, and fraught with danger. But the future, her future, was hers to command. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a stirring of anticipation, of purpose, of destiny. Not for Julian, not for what had been lost, but for the empire of life, love, and integrity she had rebuilt from the ashes. Nia Montgomery, mother, innovator, survivor, queen of her own destiny, read the email again, letting the words sink in. The world wanted to see her story, her power, her triumph, and she was ready to show them. The documentary team's email included a single line that made Nia pause. "We'd like you to also share the moment you confronted the man who abandoned you and your daughter." Her fingers froze over the keyboard, knowing that telling this part of the story could reopen old wounds and stir new storms. The golden sun dipped low over Cedar Springs, painting the quiet town in a soft amber glow, the kind of light that seemed to hold secrets of time, endurance, and quiet victories. The documentary crew packed their equipment, folding cameras and microphones into cases, their whispered excitement a distant hum behind the gentle rustle of leaves in the garden. Nia Montgomery stood on the porch of her store-turned home, her posture straight, shoulders unyielding, her brown skin radiant in the last light of day. She wore no crown, no medals, no public recognition, yet the aura of triumph clung to her like a second skin. Every hardship she had endured, every betrayal, every lonely night with Maya in her arms, had built her into the woman the world now recognized, powerful, wise, and unshakably sovereign over her life. Maya darted across the garden, curls bouncing with the pure joy of freedom, her laughter like wind chimes stirred by summer air. Her green eyes sparkled, an unmistakable reminder of her father, and her brown skin shone with vitality and energy, a living testament to her mother's resilience. She had grown up in a world of integrity, witnessing courage not in storybooks, but in her mother's every action. Julian arrived, his figure framed by the driveway, hesitant, humble. He had changed, not magically, not overnight, but through the slow, often painful process of self-reflection and therapy. His suit was still tailored, his posture still commanding, yet the arrogance that had once defined him had melted into quiet gratitude, an acknowledgement of the world he had lost and the lives he had wronged. He approached the garden with measured steps, the leash of supervision in place, legal boundaries clearly defined. Every stride was a negotiation with his own ego, a test of humility he had never faced in boardrooms or on trading floors. He watched Maya, heart tightening, chest aching, every laugh and giggle a reminder of a connection he had squandered. Nia's gaze softened, not with weakness, not with vulnerability, but with understanding and the patience of a woman who had built her empire from pain. "Maya," she called gently, "come greet your father." Maya paused, assessing, her small brow furrowing in curiosity. "Are you really him?" she asked with the blunt honesty only a child could wield. Julian swallowed. "Yes, it's me, baby," he said, voice catching. He extended a cautious hand, unsure whether it would be met with warmth, caution, or rejection. Maya ran, but not into his arms, into Nia's, her trust absolute in the woman who had been both mother and fortress. Nia held her close, then nudged her daughter gently. Maya stepped forward, small hand in Julian's. His own hand trembled, gripping hers with the weight of decades of absence, regret, and longing. The moment was quiet, fragile, unspoken, yet monumental. It was a beginning without false promises, a reconciliation without illusions, a connection framed by accountability and love. Julian felt the gravity of her trust, the fragility of the bond he had abandoned, and the impossibility of rushing forgiveness. Meanwhile, the bookstore behind them thrived, a silent testament to Nia's vision. Shelves lined with books, curated for the mind and heart, AI systems humming softly in the background, community events bustling under her management. Her empire had grown, organic and resilient, rooted not in wealth but in ingenuity, heart, and courage. Nia's mind briefly drifted to the past, the sharp sting of Julian's betrayal, the stormy nights of labor, the empty echoes of Manhattan, the silence that had saved her. She felt it, acknowledged it, and then let it go. The pain was a memory now, a stepping stone to the woman she had become. She glanced at Julian standing uncertainly by the garden path and felt no desire for revenge, no yearning for the past. His transformation, his humility, was not her responsibility. She did not need him. She had built a kingdom from the ashes of love lost, and it was hers alone to govern. Yet she allowed a small acknowledgement in her heart, a space for growth, for the possibility of reconnection, but only on terms defined by her strength and the well-being of Maya. Power, she realized, was not dominance but choice. She chose peace, she chose integrity, she chose her daughter's joy. Maya, sensing the delicate equilibrium of the adults around her, twirled in the golden light, laughter spilling over. Nia watched, pride swelling. Every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every coding session and bookstore opening had been worth this. The sight of her daughter thriving, unafraid, alive in a world she could shape with her own hands. Julian, still awkward, still tentative, took another step closer, eyes wide, vulnerable. I want to do better, he said, almost a whisper, almost to himself. I want to be present. I want to learn. I want her to know me, safely, rightly. Nia's lips pressed into a thin line, thinking not of anger but of boundaries, of what it truly meant to protect her child. You will, she said finally, firm but not cruel. On my terms, and only if you truly commit, not just with words but with action, therapy, guidance, and honesty. That is the only way forward. Julian nodded, gratitude mingling with humility. For the first time he understood that love was not possession, that redemption was earned, and that true power lay not in dominance but in responsibility. The air between them settled, a quiet truce built not on weakness but on recognition. The past was unchangeable, but the future was theirs to shape responsibly. Behind them, the cameras captured the scene, not just for a documentary, but for the world. A mother who had rebuilt everything from betrayal, a daughter whose innocence had forged truth, and a man confronting the consequences of his actions with humility. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows over the garden, turning every leaf, every blade of grass, every laughing curl of Maya's hair into a symbol of life reclaimed, destiny rewritten, and empires built not on wealth alone but on courage, love, and integrity. Nia took a deep breath, feeling the gentle rhythm of the world around her. Cedar Springs was quiet now, her empire solid, her heart full. She was not a victim, not a discarded wife, not a shadow in a man's ambition. She was a queen in her own right, sovereign over life, love, and destiny. Julian, standing humbly nearby, understood the depth of her sovereignty. He could witness her triumph, acknowledge it, and perhaps one day earn the right to be a small part of this life, but never to overshadow the empire she had built with her own hands. Maya tugged Nia's hand, giggling. "Mommy, can we open the bookstore tomorrow?" Nia laughed softly, a sound of triumph, of joy, of completion. "Yes, baby. Tomorrow we make magic again." And in that golden dusk, Cedar Springs witnessed the quiet, undeniable truth. Nia Montgomery had risen from betrayal, brokenness, and abandonment, not to take revenge, not to be celebrated, but to reclaim her destiny and build an empire that would endure far beyond the shadows of those who had tried to diminish her. Her empire was real, tangible, and unshakable. Her daughter was thriving. Her heart was whole. The world would remember her not as a discarded wife, but as a queen who rewrote the rules, who turned pain into power, and who built an unassailable dynasty of integrity and love. As the documentary crew packed up, one producer leaned closer and whispered, "Your story will inspire millions, but some powerful people won't like being reminded of how far you've come." Nia smiled faintly, unshaken. She had survived betrayal, ambition, and greed. Now she was untouchable, but she knew the next chapter of her empire was only just beginning.